What a night for Russillo and I. This is great. It's just like if we had a basketball child together, it would be Anthony Edwards. And just watching him blossom, I just feel like I'm watching our kid go through high school and get a 4.0 senior year and letter jackets and win the state championship. This is just really special. This is the first time I really felt like this guy might be the guy like a year, 2 years from now in the league. Like in a real way, like final level, face of the league, best guy in the league. He's just hitting every checkpoint, Russillo.
He is, and it feels like it's ahead of schedule. And like a concerned parent, because I get it, I still get it. I was afraid for him in a way. Like I was afraid. I go, what if everybody loads up defensively on him and no one else is scoring and Conley or McDaniels can't get anything going on and Rudy's not an option and who knows what to expect with Cat. I was like, it's not going to be his fault. It's not going to be his fault. And the beauty of this team through this series, at least, was we know the defense was going to travel for every game, but there was these little pockets where, I know Conley was bad tonight, but Conley got Grayson Allen for like a half straight, Towns, when you looked at his numbers tonight, you're like, wow, he scored a ton. McDaniels had a huge night in there. Alexander Walker seems to hit all sorts of shots. If you leave Rudy, look, we know he's not an offensive threat. The point of this is then Ant would just say, okay, you know what, though? You know what? Thank you to everyone.
Thanks for the help.
But this quarter is mine.
Well, and when it's about to happen, like when it's in progress, it's like when you go to the movies and they start showing the previews and you're like, oh, the lights are dimming. The movie's going to start now. And he hits like that first shot and you're like, are we going to have a little run here? And then it happens.
It's
and
like
he
an
gets
alert.
it going on both ends. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Marty Fish, tennis player. I guess just an unbelievable golfer as well. Tough life. But anytime something's happening during the regular season, we just have a code. Now, he's a huge Timberwolves fan, so he's just texting me. We have this alert code for Ant. And it's probably like in the beginning of the Golden State thing. We're like, do you see what's happening tonight? Like, have you paid attention? Where everybody who's just a league pass junkie, like, this is what it's supposed to be like. But we're so hard on the superstars because we kind of want it to happen all the time. Like Ant's first half, like, oh, what's going on with him? But with him, I'm like, whatever. It doesn't matter. And then he and Booker go toe to toe for the third quarter. And then to see Ant, like, I don't know that I've had a playoff game. There was 141 left, Bill, and it was 117, 113. And it was the least drama I've felt. It was just like, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like,
the Suns mistakenly fouled because they thought there was 20 seconds left. They said, hey, you guys have 100 seconds left. Ant hit a 28-footer with 5:34 left to make the score 105-101 Minnesota. And it was a bomb. And that was the official Ant alert. It was like, uh-oh, here we go. And then he just kept making shots. He basically turned Beal into a summer meme over the course of the fourth quarter. Beal, I just could not have been worse tonight. I mean, it was an iconic, awful game. It was such a bad game that we were texting about what a bad game he was having before the end of the game when he had 2 straight turnovers, gave up the monster dunk to Ant, and then fouled out 50 feet from the basket. It's just like Ant just ruined him tonight. But 40 points, 31 in the second half. And it was the same thing as game 3, which we didn't talk about in part 1. There was like an alpha thing going on in the game where it's a control of the surroundings that I gotta say it reminded me a little of Jordan. I don't feel like that's like a crazy thing to say. Something about the superior athleticism combined with the moment, combined with him really just wanting to kill the other team. He said it in the interview after. He was like, I just want to kill. But he said it tonight to the TNT guys at the end. He's like, I told you all, I just want to kill everybody and get them out of my way. Like, that's how he's wired. And this is the stuff that we love. So we'll see where it goes. But age 22, this is pretty good.
Yeah, because I was trying to think of like who. It's one round, right? But it's like who comes into the league where it's already understood, okay, this is his team. And I'm not talking about like Jalen Green's sophomore season with the Rockets where they're not good and he's taking 20 shots a game. And again, to update the Jalen Green stuff, we felt really good about him at the close of this year. So there's younger players that are really talented that we've seen put up huge numbers. And you're like, okay, well, this guy's the number one option. You're like, okay, but what does it really mean? Like, this team has a chance to do something really special this year. I don't know what to make of these teams in the West. Like, I got to pick somebody, but I don't know.
It feels more wide open than it did 2 weeks ago for them.
But I think in a way of like, yeah, in a good way. And, you know, the offense, there was just a lot of times it was like, okay, if they have their one Achilles heel, like what could it possibly be? But then I start thinking about how they have enough size with Jokic. And then it's like, okay, but with this Murray situation, is there going to be enough wing scoring if you're going to have a third guy kind of step up offensively for Minnesota? Then that changes the landscape of like what I even think is possible for them. But back to the Ant point, okay, of course there's LeBron, where it was fairly apparent this minute he suited up that it was going to be his team. And then he started doing some really cool stuff early on.
That was 07 against the Pistons was the moment. And I don't know if this, I'm not ready to say this was the moment for Ant, but it was, it only reminded me of like watching
that was the
TV
Eastern Conference
going,
Finals.
Yeah,
it was the Pistons
and it was
making
25 straight points, and it was a much tougher opponent. But he had a couple checkpoints leading up to that. And the point is that Ant's hitting those checkpoints leading up to that. And now to me, it's conceivable that he could go against Denver and knock out Jokic. It's conceivable. I wouldn't predict it, but it's conceivable. And by the way, Russillo, this starts with the Team USA last summer, which he goes in and they don't realize that it's going to become his team. But over the course of whatever, they slowly realize like, oh shit, we can't keep this guy off the court. And then it spreads to the season and it just keeps going, kept climbing the ladder. And then he's going against his hero in this series, which he talked about in all the right ways, like with the right amount of respect, but also like, I also want to beat this guy. He said that in the interview after. It's like, I can't wait to play with him this summer for Team USA and give him shit that I sent him home. You know, it's just, there's a spirit to him that I think the league really needs.
That's the part that is scary about like how big of a deal he can be as far as a superstar, right? Wade, I think, is another good comparison. At least Wade was in his third year when they won that title, and he was the reason why it happened. I think more so than any single player on the Heat team. I don't think that's really even debatable. But you know, in the beginning of the year when, well, maybe it wasn't the beginning of the year when he had the John Collins dunk, I think I've had 3 monologues on Ant. So if this were a Sports Illustrated cover, like keeping track of him, this season I've had more monologues on Ant than probably any other player in the NBA. And I had this one where I was talking about like, look, his game is the most aesthetically pleasing. Like, this is what you want every awesome basketball player to be able to do. Like, hit all the shots, show supreme athleticism and a floor full of the world's best athletes, and then also just have these Sean Kemp, like, I want to insult your family type dunks mixed into all of these other things that he does. But then his personality, and the defense where he has moments where I'd be like, wait, is that McDaniels? Oh my God, Ant picked him up over half court. And now he's like, I'm going to take you apart. And then he's also like fun. He feels 100% real in this world where you're just so aware of your surroundings at such a young age when you have any kind of profile. It doesn't seem like any of that bothers him whatsoever. And I was just raving and raving and raving about him. And they actually put my quote up at the Minneapolis airport.
Oh,
and yeah, I know. And then he had the dunk against Collins where I did another open of just like, he makes me feel like a kid again when I'm watching him do all these things. But like, look, the dunks, the athleticism, the attitude, the quotes, all the growth of his game is what should scare the rest of the league. The fact that he, you know, this year when I was watching these drives and it wasn't like, all right, maybe I'll get fouled and get some free throws. And he actually doesn't get much of a superstar whistle at all. But these kickouts, the trust that he still has with his teammates. He had a play late tonight where he got bottled up. He grabbed the offensive rebound when no one thought he could get it. He got trapped in the corner and he got out of the trap and still made a pass. And then Minnesota kind of screwed it up. But there's an understanding of the game that he seems to have also that combines with this personality where all these older players are totally cool with him being the alpha. Like he laughs at Cat's jokes.
Well, and he shouts out the teammates in every interview, which I always love. I told you I went to that game, the Laker game a couple weeks ago, and I was so impressed with the patience that he had offensively. But then just seeing it in person, how he deals with everyone on his team, and what a force he is around everything feeds off him, like everything. And you just know it when you see it. I think it's been the best thing that ever happened to Towns. Towns was great tonight. And Towns is somebody that there's an alternate universe where he just never has an important playoff moment in his career, and he just becomes your typical frustrating, talented, but guy who let you down in the NBA playoffs over and over again. I thought he was really good tonight.
And since he's come back, I've noticed his passing. Not saying it wasn't there before, but he's a more willing passer.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you're not going to love him. I mean, you had a tweet the other day about his bad fouls. He had 3 terrible fouls, helped get him into the bonus.
Yeah.
He had a foul that was in the bonus at 3:41 when Phoenix couldn't score once Rudy got back in, and you were just like, what are you doing? I also think Towns leads the league in weirdness per 36, but
is that a basketball reference?
It is. You got to keep scrolling over. But Towns was awesome. And if you think about the player that would be the prototypical roster fit, like, okay, well, Ant can kind of score at all these different levels, but you need some spacing. But it's like, wait, they have Rudy. Oh, they'd love to have a stretch 4. It's just that Towns at one point probably thought he was going to be in the Hall of Fame. And who knows, the Basketball Hall of Fame would probably still get in. But, Towns, okay, we could have go back to doing what you want to do and take 20 shots a game and all that stuff. We're not really going to win. Defensively, Towns was always a mess. And now it's like everything, this rising tide thing of this entire team has been incredible. And the offensive concerns I would have late against another really good team tight in the playoffs, it was never even an issue here. Phoenix felt helpless against them.
Yeah. This was Towns' first really good playoff game of the series. Now, they didn't totally need him before, but I am just so upset that I'm never doing this again. Just remind me next year when we're doing podcasts in the last 10 days of the season. I'm never overreacting to the last week of the season again. I'm not doing it because watching the Suns beat this team 9 days apart at the end of the year really messed me up. I really like the T-Wolves. I bet on them 16-1 to make the finals against the Celtics 2 weeks before the end of the season. And by the time the playoffs are starting, I'm like, yeah, Phoenix is going to beat them. Just a bad matchup. No thought at all put into it. And then you watch these games and it's like, they're way bigger. Ant's the best player on the floor. Phoenix's depth and the Beal issue, which we'll talk about a little later, just kind of mushroomed into this awful thing. Their body language was awful. You could see it today. They were dying to fall apart in that game today. You could feel it.
I thought this was way more the way you're talking about it, though. I thought Phoenix was way more impressive than my expectations for this game down 3-0.
Yeah, because who was impressive? It was Booker and KD.
Right.
Both of those guys were at least we're not going down this way. Nobody else showed up, but those two guys were great. I mean, Beal had one of the worst backs to the walls games. It's always going to be mentioned when we're going to be talking about him this summer, and we're calling him Bradley Beal's not expiring contract, and we're just going to mention this game. What did he end with? Did he even get to 10 points?
So he got to 9, which is shocking.
He had 9 points, 2 assists, 1 rebound. He was 4 for 13. He had 6 turnovers, and he fouled out. And had an incident with Vogel where he ran by him and kind of stiffed him on a handshake that went viral on Twitter. Other than that, pretty good game.
The numbers don't do it justice.
No, they don't.
This is one of the special, terrible games of anyone with a profile. At one point, I wrote down his line. He had 2 personal fouls, 0 points, 0 rebounds, 0 assists, and 2 turnovers. And I was like, okay, it looks like he's going for the Tony Snell tonight. And because of the fouls, they ended up having to go to the bench a little bit earlier because Nurkic had 2 fouls. And then Phoenix was just like, look, we're going to go small. I think they were going to try to go small at some point anyway. But the problem is when you go that small, even though it was a really tight whistle, I think, throughout most of the game, when you're small, you're just going to end up fouling in a bunch of spots you don't normally want to because there's just nothing you can do physically. And so it's like, okay, well, Beal will come in. He can't be this bad in the second half. And he was. And, you mentioned those turnovers. They were like super turnovers. They weren't just your typical NBA turnovers. They were truly horrible. And it was still 110-109. All right.
Yeah.
So it's 110-109. And Beal goes to throw it cross court to KD, who's not even looking at it.
Right. He nails
Right?
him in the shoulder.
Hit him in the so it turns into a turnover, but then Conley can't corral the ball. Phoenix comes
Right.
back
That didn't
the other
even
way.
count for one of the turnovers. He had
Wasn't
two
even
other
one of the
turnovers after that.
Yeah, right. So then during this melee of getting the ball, Phoenix brings it across, and because of the scramble, Beal's wide open at the top of the key. And I always every time a shot goes up, it's pretty nauseating to do it as often as I do. I'll just make myself say whether or not I think it's going in or not.
Right.
And sometimes I'll look at the guy's feet or his hands. I'll just be like, nope, yep, nope, yep. When he caught it, I was like out loud by myself. I'm like, there's no shot attempted this weekend I have been less confident in than this one. And
maybe a Precious Achua 15-footer game
15-footer, 2-footer.
Game 3.
The handshake thing with Vogel, although look, Beal during the Wizards years had some real all NBA pout team where it's like, hey man, I know you put up huge numbers and you're really talented and everything, but the team always kind of stinks and it's a little on you. I know they had the run in 17 and then the flirtation with the playoffs there with the Westbrook year when Westbrook put up big numbers. But there was always this element of Beal where you were like, who are you mad at? What do you have? And you did the extension too. You got the extra money. You got the extra year, which is what everybody kind of saying, deep down, he wanted to do all these things. So then when he comes off the court, though, with Vogel, to be fair to him, I think he's so incredibly frustrated with himself because nothing's working out and he's picking up a foul every 2 or 3 minutes. I think it was almost like Vogel going, hey, give me 5. And anyone with any pride is like, I don't want a 5 right now.
Yeah.
I don't want one.
I just want to go to my room and put on Pink Floyd.
He was
singularly atrocious tonight. It was really rough.
It's kind of our job to never forget.
Listen, I said last year when they made the trade, I thought it was a dumb trade. I didn't think it would make much of a difference for them long term. And I said if they had Beal instead of Shamet against Denver last year, I still think they lose. This year, if they had Shamet instead of Beal, maybe this goes 5. Might even been able to sneak it to 6. I don't know. Does Shamet face make a difference?
Look, I don't love Beal, but he was free.
He was.
He was free.
But he wasn't totally free, though, because it was the Chris Paul expiring, which they could have used in February to try to get a better asset than this Bradley Beal contract that now is almost $54 million.
Maybe, but the biggest headliner for this trade deadline was Bogdanović, who wasn't even part of the closing group for the Knicks.
Yeah, fair. But maybe they could have gotten Zach LaVine in November. I don't know. Who knows?
Oh, that would
you want
everything.
Zach LaVine? I don't know. Yeah,
I think I'd rather have Beal.
Well, they might find out next year. All right, so Minnesota, Denver, and Denver still needs to win Game 5. Murray, we'll see if he plays. But do you feel differently about a Minnesota-Denver series than you did 2 weeks ago? Because I feel at least mildly different. I would still pick Denver, but I'm hesitating now.
I don't want to get caught up in this because I also think Phoenix is a mess.
Yes.
And you could even see it in the beginning, some of the stuff they were doing, Nurkic came over with Nurkic came over with Rudy to set a screen for KD, and KD's like, get out of here.
Right.
I don't want to switch into Rudy. I've got Cat on me. And then there was another play where Booker didn't have McDaniels on him, and then O'Neal came over to set the screen where then he'd be switching to McDaniels, and Booker's like, no, get away. And I'm watching this to start of Game 4. It was 2 of the first 5 plays they ran. And I'm thinking, are you guys still this screwed up? And there's a bunch of examples of that, of just wait. There was another play too where Booker took his guy into the corner and then Gordon had Conley on him and KD had a better defender on him. And Booker had to be like, hey, set a screen for KD at the break because they're going to get a switch into Conley. It was like, oh yeah, great idea. So anyway.
Well, the reason I asked that question is because 2 years ago, a team built around some young stars that thought they were going to be in a dogfight in round 1 against a team that they allegedly didn't match up that great against was the Boston Celtics playing Kevin Durant and the Brooklyn Nets. stole game one at the end, sweeps them, goes on to make the finals. And at some point over that series, past some invisible point and rounded into some different, better version of themselves. And I'm wondering if that happened with Minnesota.
Well, I think it's a really good comp, too, because Brooklyn was messed up.
And they also had Kevin Durant.
Can we just, before we get into the Minnesota-Denver thing, spend some time on Durant? Because we haven't really done it yet.
Yeah, it hurts, but I'm ready to do it.
Go ahead.
Because he got swept this year. Last year, lost, forced his way out of Brooklyn, ends up losing in round one. Year before, gets swept. Year before, foot on the line against Milwaukee. Year before, no playoffs.
They made it to round two
gets
last
hurt in
year.
the finals. Round two, sorry. Yeah, I mean, when you think of where he was in 2019 before he hurt his calf, when he was averaging 35 a game the first series and a half, he was in that Houston series, and he just was unequivocally the best player in the world. And since then, he's been one of the best 10 to 12 players in the world, but has not been at that same level. And now he's going to be 36 years old next year. I don't love the situation he's in. I don't know how they improve the team, and we'll see if he stays. Not great though. Not a great not a great last 5 years, Russillo. I don't feel good about it, to answer your question.
The whole thing feels pretty ugly because, last year they got the scare from L.A. Clippers, but then, George isn't playing, Kawhi gets hurt, and then they're basically like, hey, Westbrook, let's go. OKC Westbrook. You get all his possessions. Right. Westbrook puts up big numbers. It still ends up only being a 5-game series. And then they get 2-2 with Denver. And if you remember, Booker was going crazy.
3 and 4. One of those games, what did they average? They scored 100 points combined or 90 points combined in game 3. It was some crazy number.
No, it's an absurd number. So it's
or 89, something
86.
Like that. Yeah.
86. Booker went 20 of 25 for 47
Jesus.
points and 9 assists, 3 turnovers.
And then Denver just turned it on the next 2.
Yeah, and then in that series, because you're kind of like, all right, well, they got it to 6 with the eventual champs. It's like, yeah, but they got blasted in 3 of those games. But you don't think that this is happening, okay? And then you're probably thinking, all right, well, Durant will have been here longer. They'll figure it all out. We'll have these 3 guys that are really good scorers. That's what really matters in the playoffs. And I can't help but think of this, whatever this chapter is we're on with Durant, it's got to count for something, because I thought he was really good tonight, but man, watching Ant just take over these quarters, and you're going, shouldn't Durant have a couple of these quarters?
Yeah.
And it's not so much even about the sweep. Now, I don't know if I'm missing something, because the overall numbers, look, when you're a 1 or 2 option, you're still going to get your 20 plus points.
But this was the case of the Boston series 2 years ago. Remember, Tatum was just better than him for a week and a half. Still outplayed him. The last time he was really at the level you're talking about was that Bucks series.
Right.
And that was in 2021, which is 3 years ago. But, his 2007 draft. He's been in the league. Is this his 17th season? It's kind of crazy. So that the guy that we have in our heads, just because it's this weird thing that happens sometimes in sports where the guy gets older, but he looks exactly alike. I remember this happened with Jerry Rice, where it wasn't really Jerry Rice anymore, but it still looked like Jerry Rice. So you're like, oh, it's still Jerry Rice when he was in the Raiders, but it wasn't really Jerry Rice anymore. I don't think that's the case with KD, because KD still statistically was awesome. But what you're talking about is there's a 5-6% decline's the wrong word, but he's just not, he can't match baskets with somebody like Ant in the same way. When Ant's feeling like that, it's like Durant's not okay, now I'm going to throw some punches. We don't see that in the same way. And maybe it's part of Booker. He's on Booker's team too. And maybe there's stuff he doesn't want to do from a takeover standpoint. I don't know. Maybe he's just older. But I'm with you. There's something slightly disappointing about it.
And he went for 30 twice. Game 2 was bad. He ends up with 25 and 4. The shooting numbers are fine except for 3. But, his shooting splits are still exactly what you'd expect them to be, 55, 42. gets to the free throw line a bunch. My idea of what he is, the idea of what Ishbia thought he was doing when he makes this trade, because I don't blame an owner for being like, if I just say yes right now, I get Kevin Durant on my basketball team. But to watch it feel like it's like, oh, okay, he got some numbers, but like when was it so clear he was the best player? When did it seem like he was completely in control, that the other team had no answer for him? And it just doesn't feel like that enough with him, especially when there's a guy on the other team that's doing those things.
Yeah. Well, and there's also more good offensive players now.
Yeah.
And that might be a small piece of it, but they never figured out. One of the things I thought with the Suns is they never figured out what their best five was and what that looked like. And sometimes I almost thought in my head, maybe it was Durant at the 5, which is the matchup. That was the lineup I thought they were going to go at in this Minnesota series, to try to like turn it on Minnesota a little bit, little smaller, little Golden State 2017-ish, but it just didn't work.
This game was so bad for everybody that, nobody else had double figures. Nobody could hang on to the basketball. There's just so many moments in these games. You're like, what are you guys doing? And then guys got scared to shoot on top of everything else. I'm surprised.
Can I say something that's really important?
Oh, I'm going to listen.
Because this happened with the 2011 Heat too. And every once in a while, these teams, they load up with the 2 or the 3 expensive guys. And then they're like, no, we're going to be able to build around these guys. And we're smarter than everybody else. We're going to be able to build, we'll find 8. You only need like 4 or 5 more role players and we're going to be great. And then we get to a situation like this and it's like, yeah, we just didn't have enough around those guys. We got to really build around. And it's like, yeah, this is what happens when you spend $150 million on 3 guys. You end up with like Josh Okogie in big spots, You end up with no point guard. You just don't have a point guard. I do think they miss Grayson, and maybe he would have swung one game, and they lucked out with the fact that Grayson was so good this year, considering where I think all of us were on him heading into that trade. But when you go all in on guys, I've been saying this with the Lakers too. Like you're going to spend $105 million on Davis and LeBron. Guess what? You got to roll the dice with D'Angelo Russell. You got to roll the dice with Rui Hachimura. That's how it goes. You're not just going to be able to build a super team. So I think people forget that over and over again. It's really with the situation you want to be in is like where Minnesota was, where they at least were able to draft a couple of the guys they had. That's where Boston was, or where Denver was, where you have some of these guys on your team already when you're building around that, versus where Phoenix is, where the only guy that's as a homegrown guy is Booker. Everyone else is gone or traded, or like, do you think about like that Jalen Smith, that could have been Halliburton, all of these moments that they had to build the team around. They just didn't have it.
No, and especially getting rid of Bridges and, Cam, and then, the Durant trade, where I don't know if we're doing any of this now, but you bring up that Miami comparison, at least they were losing to Dallas in the NBA Finals, okay?
True.
And you still, if you're Riley, you're like, what can we do? Like, okay, we'll put those 3 guys together and we'll figure out the rest of it a little bit later on.
But they really had the 5 because they also had Mike Miller and they had Haslam and they had Chalmers. Like on paper, that made more sense than that. But then when it actually got into it, they didn't have, Dallas had more depth and LeBron sucked in the finals. And that was why. And Dirk was good. But once they added Ray Allen, I
don't, when I looked at that team and you go like, oh, well, they could have done this. You made it to 4 straight finals. We're talking about a team that just got swept. And I was thinking
round 1.
Right. And I was thinking about the story because you and I were both doing, it's not the Vegas Super Bowl. I was in Phoenix for that one because it was a trade deadline. We were texting being like, I think this is happening. Yeah. And then we tape the pod and you're kind of like, I just can't help myself. And then I'm like, okay, well, you just added Kevin Durant. But then when the story started coming out a little bit more about how it went down, it's like, well, Durant was adamant that he didn't want to turn it into some open market thing. And I'm like, well, if I'm the Nets, I'm going, well, your 4-year extension just kicked in. You wanted the coach, you wanted me fired. So, apologies if we don't want to fucking acquiesce to every one of your demands here because you're burning us with a 4-year extension left on this thing. Yeah. And so we knew that part of it, or at least the part that was told. And then you think of what was given up and you go, okay, so then it's all these first, because it just feels like anybody of this magnitude's like the 4 first and maybe a swap on top of everything else. And then it's like, okay, but it's also Cam Johnson, who's a nice role player. And then it's Mikal, who, felt better about last year. I still think there's a lot of stock in Bridges. And you're like, but who are you bidding against if Durant was saying that I only wanted to do this way? I mean, did Ishbia just get worked?
Well, when we did the pod after, I think we both said, "Yeah, you kind of have to do it. You have to get Kevin Durant."
I know I said it. I said it. So
no, we both said it,
right.
But we also said that's a lot, and you don't have a lot of outs now. Like if this doesn't 100% work, there's not a lot of moves left. If these two guys don't work with Ayton and Paul, what's your next move? And then when they did the Beal thing, that was I was out on the Beal trade. I did not like it. And I thought but you get why they did all their outs.
Because like Durant leaves you less out. So it's like, okay, well, we may as well add somebody in Beal from a talent standpoint that is going to be better than any other transaction.
But then they did the Ayton for Nurkic and Grayson. And I don't know.
But they were so done with Ayton. They were just,
I get it. But once they did all those moves, they had nothing left. There were no other moves. That's your team. And we're going to do the playoff panic draft in our next break. But,
we never answered the question. I never answered the Minnesota-Denver thing.
Oh, yeah.
I know what Minnesota will want to do, with Rudy on Gordon to try to take away the lob threat. And that can screw up Denver a little bit by having Gordon spaced as opposed to that dunker threat that destroys all these other teams.
Yeah.
Ant, like, is he going to do something really, really special here and take out the defending champs in the second round? Like, who are they going to have defend him? Peyton Watson? Wait a minute. It'll be Pope, but it doesn't matter. Like with some of these guys, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean he's going to be shut down. It just means things are going to be a little bit harder for him. The same way they were harder for Booker throughout this entire series until he could get free in Game 4, but it was too late. And that big third quarter is because Rudy had foul trouble, so Booker could drive at will in this one.
Go ahead.
If
I gave you Minnesota, Denver, OKC, Dallas, Boston, Orlando, and Knicks, Indiana, it's pretty clear what series we're going to be the most focused on out of those 4.
Well, easily, yeah.
Which is crazy. Minnesota, Denver will be the marquee series of round 2.